I'm Amanda Walker, and welcome to Inside America, the show that brings you insight and analysis of the biggest issues facing America right now. In our final episode of 2024, we take a look back at an incredible year, defined by one of the most tumultuous presidential campaigns in living memory. A last-minute candidate swap, a criminal conviction, assassination attempt, hurricanes and billionaires. So much happened. We're going to remind you of it all and reflect on which moments will endure as we look ahead to the first year of Donald Trump's second presidency.
It's really been something very special, and I have to say, Time Magazine getting this honor for the second time, I think I like it better this time, actually. Because
in naming him Person of the Year, Time Magazine said perhaps no single individual has played a larger role in changing the course of politics and history than Trump.
47th president.
Now, in this Trump era, nothing stays in the news cycle for long. So coming up, we'll explore which moments will stick and how 2024 will fare in the annals of history.
I wonder if, as there have been whole books written about 1968, we might see books about 2024 10, 20, 30 years from now.
And we'll be asking our panel for their key moments of the year and reflections on what lies ahead. So 2024 was defined by an astonishing political comeback. Trump's victory is cause for celebration for some. For others, it's the beginning of a deeply dangerous moment in American life. So let's remind ourselves of the whirlwind that led up to it.
There's at least 24 lies that he's told about me, and you can see.
After refusing to even debate them, other Republican candidates who tried to position themselves as alternatives were trounced by Donald Trump. Just out of winter, and America was on track for a 2020 rematch between the two oldest major party candidates ever to run for US president. But bagging the nomination didn't mean Trump could coast unencumbered onto the campaign trail. He had some serious court dates in his calendar. The April hush money trial saw him accused of falsifying business records.
Free Palestine!
While his lawyers argued his innocence in court, protests against Israel's war in Gaza swept through US college campuses. Trump called for a crackdown.
to every college president, I say remove the encampments immediately, vanquish the radicals, and take back our campuses for all of the normal students.
While rallying his supporters against what he called his sham trial.
I think it's an unlawful exercise in very stupid and very evil politics.
He was ultimately found guilty on 34 felony counts. Now, that would be enough to sink most presidential hopefuls, but for Donald Trump, a convicted felon's status only seemed to fire up the engines. June saw the debate that changed everything.
With the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look.
Joe Biden's performance set alarm bells ringing for the Democratic Party. As they procrastinated, Donald Trump blazed the campaign trail, surviving this extraordinary moment. Again, sealing his status as Trump, the persecuted hero. Just days later, another case against Donald Trump, this one for mishandling classified documents, is thrown out, giving him even more to celebrate during his formal nomination at the Republican National Convention.
We will press forward, and together we will win, win, win.
Just when the Republicans are almost drowning in attention, the spotlight makes a dramatic shift.
I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president.
Cue Kamala Harris, the first black woman of South Asian descent to head a major party ticket, when Donald Trump's new, younger, energized competitor. The second and final TV debate had Democrats fizzing with excitement.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that.
Let us choose joy.
A star-studded convention appeared to give the Democrats a real shot in the arm, but the polls never quite matched the glossy on-stage enthusiasm.
Do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
The campaign becomes a battle for social media dominance, with Kamala Harris, the queen of memes, and Donald Trump targeting the bro show influencers to capture that often neglected young male vote.
Take over, Eli, just take over.
Capping it off with a new billionaire bromance, while A-list celebrities line up to endorse Kamala Harris. A showbiz election against the backdrop of global turmoil. The US appears impotent as the war in Gaza spreads to Lebanon. And the war in Ukraine shows no sign of stopping. But the hard-fought release of 4 Americans who were detained in Russia, including journalist Evan Gershkovich, offers President Biden a much-needed diplomatic victory.
Deals like this one come with tough calls, and there are never any guarantees. But there's nothing that matters more to me than protecting Americans.
In September, hurricane and election season collide. Helene was the deadliest storm of the decade. Even that wasn't immune from politicization. Officials criticized misinformation, including Donald Trump's false claims that disaster funds were being used on illegal immigrants rather than Americans. Finally, it was up to voters to cast their judgments on a turbulent campaign. The world now knows what happened next.
I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president.
Hear me when I say, the light of America's promise will always burn bright.
It turns out this election was not stolen or rigged. Since November, the world has seen a relatively magnanimous Donald Trump still basking in a post-election glow. Though he did manage a scathing response to President Biden's pardoning of his son Hunter, calling it a miscarriage of justice. Any sense of post-election calm was completely shattered by the fatal shooting of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, which revealed the level of rage against the US healthcare system. Trump will be at the helm of an angry, divided nation in a volatile world. The fall of Assad in Syria in the dying days of the Biden administration has added another layer of complexity to US involvement in the Middle East. What Donald Trump chooses to do with all of that in 2025 is anyone's guess.
So much to take in there. So many moments that were described as being unprecedented. It could be the word of the year, but does it really apply to what we've all been witnessing? I spoke to historian Matthew Dallek. He's written books ranging from Ronald Reagan's first victory to the remaking of American conservatism. And I started by asking him if there's ever been an election year quite like this one.
So 2024 was absolutely a wild political year. It felt like the country became more unraveled in some ways.
It was already pretty unraveled.
It was already at a very unraveled state, and I think it became even more so. But it does remind me of other past presidential election years, especially 1968. Issues were totally different. The events were quite different, but we had multiple assassinations, MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert F. Kennedy. You had a very close election, a president who withdrew in the form of Lyndon Johnson in March of 1968, foreign conflicts, especially the Vietnam War, which were deeply divisive at home, and a sense of a country unraveling, coming apart really at the seams. There was also political violence outside the Democratic convention, so there's no perfect analogy, but it does feel, I wonder if, as there have been whole books written about 1968, we might see books about 2024, 10, 20, 30 years from now.
1968 did not have a Donald Trump on the scene, though. How would you characterize him as a politician who has had this litany of things surrounding him that would have sunk any normal politician? What is it about Donald Trump that can survive everything that's gone before to be elected president again?
Well, first, I think we need to back up, and critics and supporters alike probably should recognize he's a very skilled politician. I mean, he's extremely good on camera. He's really good at whipping up his base. He generates news like no one else. I think he has a feel for media, and not just, of course, reality TV where he got his start, but Twitter in 2016, and then these influencer podcasts in 2024.
Let's talk about that. Has that landscape shifted? Is it going to stay that way now? Is traditional news a thing of the past, and are all politicians going to now look to these more modern platforms?
Well, I definitely do not think that traditional news is a thing of the past. I mean, maybe I'm reflecting my own bias. The mainstream news media drives still a lot of the coverage, a lot of the stories. For example, look at Trump's cabinet picks, Pete Hegseth or Matt Gaetz, right? I mean, the stories about them are driven by mainstream news media. But there is increasingly an alternate universe, media universe, podcasts, X, Instagram, TikTok, and that's a different conversation. A lot of what's happening there is not even necessarily fact-based, but it's a different reality where a lot of increasingly more and more Americans, especially young Americans, are getting their news and information. And in that sense, Trump was quite shrewd. The other point, though, that I think helps explain Trump's extraordinary comeback is that there is a rage, I think, in the United States against institutions, against elites, and I think that rage has intensified since 2016. So Trump in 2016 said he was going to tear down the establishment, the global power structure, bring wealth back to the United States, right, to help working class Americans. He made a similar argument, but on steroids in 2024. And that anger among the electorate, 80% of roughly of the country don't think that they're frustrated or angry with the federal government. Well, Trump is the vehicle to blow that up. And I think that explains in part how he's able to survive 34 felony convictions, all the other indictments, criminal indictments, being found liable for sexual abuse, the January 6th insurrection, and on and on. He is a powerful vehicle for that anti-government. It's not just anger, but really a kind of disgust with the system.
Yeah, you mentioned that rage. You've written extensively about political violence. So whether it's political, corporate, look what happened to United Healthcare's CEO. Are we going to see, I mean, no one has a crystal ball, but the climate that we're in right now, should people be worried about violence in 2025?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, we don't know what kind of violence it's going to take. I think had Trump lost, we would have already seen violence in the days and weeks following the election, maybe from his supporters, and he would have whipped them up. The fact that he won, and he won pretty handily, has created an eerie calm in the country, and yet we have not just social media, right, where all manner of conspiracy theories and attacks on other people are happening, but we have this underlying layer of disgust with CEOs, with corporations, with the medical and scientific establishment, with government officials, with the FBI, right? I mean, it's a long list. And in that kind of environment where you also have someone very high profile, such as Trump, whipping up this hostility, feeding off it, taking energy from it, I think it's very, and then you have a country awash in guns, right? More guns than people. It's very easy to see more political violence, sort of violence directed at someone like a CEO of United Healthcare.
We are living in this moment now, but people will be studying this moment in decades to come. I'm interested in your view on a high school history lesson in 30 years' time. Will they be talking about Donald Trump as an aberration or the beginning of a new norm in America?
Well, I think whatever they say 30 years from now about Trump, I don't think it will be that he's an aberration. I think it will be that he very much represents the political mainstream and was once, his ideas were once considered quite extreme, right? Once defined really as extremist outside of the norms on immigration, foreign policy isolationism, political violence and rhetoric, dehumanization of opponents, but that has become mainstream, that he represents a kind of culmination of this decades-long disgust with government and disgust with politics, and that he's that kind of pinnacle in a way. The other thing is he has really cemented, of course, his hold over one of the two major political parties in the United States. And that is going to be a huge part of his legacy. And whoever comes after him, it's hard to see a reversion back.
Well, yeah, is the Republican Party of Reagan and Romney dead?
I think that's, it's not entirely dead. I mean, there are some elements of it that still exist, a kind of pro-business, small taxes, cut regulations. You see that in Trump's Treasury Secretary nominee, the guy Scott Bessent. So it's not entirely dead, but it's certainly not the dominant. I mean, Trump is MAGA. The MAGA movement is the dominant force atop the Republican Party, and I think that will be seen as kind of a mainstream force. And then the other thing I'll say 30 years from now is that it's actually going to hinge in part, maybe in large part, on Trump's second term. Because if Trump is a failure, which is a very real possibility, he's facing a far different landscape from 2017, with a lot more problems both globally and I think domestically as well. He has promised more, in a sense, this time than he did the first time around. And he's also put into place people who are, frankly, far more radical than even in the first go-round. So I think part of it depends on how people see him perform over the next 4 years. And then what comes after that? Do we enter into a war? Does inflation spike because of tariffs? Does he try to deport 15 million people, which would create chaos and bloodshed on the streets of the country? All of these are open questions, but that will go a long way to determining also how people talk about Trump.
Historian Matthew Dalek there, reminding us of previous wild times, but concurring that 2024 was one for the history books. So after all the drama and divisions that have shaken the nation this year, what should people be bracing themselves for in the new year? Joining me to make some tentative predictions is Axios host and editor Naila Boodoo, and we welcome back Professor Jen Goldbeck from the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland. Welcome to you both. So it's been a bit of a strange period post-election, I've certainly found. We've had, during the election, Donald Trump talking about revenge, being a big dictator on day one, mass deportations. And since then, we've had polite, cordial Trump in the Oval Office just behind us with Joe Biden. Victory is clearly sweet. Naila, how long do you think nice Trump will last?
Well, I think it's always a question of whatever the moment calls for, right? And I think making any predictions about President-elect Trump is foolish, because we know that he is someone who likes to just sort of fly by the seat of his pants. He likes to talk about his gut instincts and go with that, which changes often.
And things are going well at the moment. He's won, it's all to come, but there are a lot of challenges that he will be faced with, Jen. Is he going to rise to them?
Oh, I mean, if I'm making a prediction, I don't think so. When we look at what he promised on the campaign trail, it was consistently very big, difficult things. I'm going to bring down the price of groceries. I'm going to solve the immigration crisis. I'm going to deal with government administration and excess spending. Those are difficult, systematic problems. And what he promised was an instant solution that was really appealing to his followers. But the reality on the ground is he can't just snap his fingers and fix those problems. We're starting to already see that in his comments where he says, bringing down the price of groceries, what control do I have over that? So he's walking it back a little. And I think people who were hoping for that instant fix are going to be really disappointed with his first 100 days in office.
And I was going to say, we are already seeing him walk that back. I will say, I feel like most presidents do this. They make promises, and when they get into office, they realize that the difficulty of governing makes those things sometimes more difficult than they think it will be.
Yeah.
And we certainly are already seeing President Trump saying particularly when it comes to prices and inflation, trying to maybe start to level set.
But that whole living up to and keeping promises thing is quite interesting with Trump, isn't it? Because I know, Jen, you spent a lot of the summer at Trump rallies speaking to Trump supporters. It certainly felt like at his first go around that when he didn't do things that he said he was going to do, it kind of didn't matter to them. Do you think it's the same this time?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what we saw was a shifting of the blame for Trump failing to deliver on his promises onto the Democrats, and then onto other forces. They is a big person who gets blamed when Trump doesn't succeed. Now, it's going to be interesting this term because he kind of has control of the courts. He has control of both houses of Congress. And so are we going to be able to blame Democrats for getting in the way of him not accomplishing what he wants, especially the big things like shutting down the Department of Education, for example? That's the sort of thing where he could push for that and call for it. Is it going to happen? I think that's a big question in terms of prognosticating, is how much are Democrats going to stand in the way? How much are Republicans going to block his efforts? And then who's he going to blame if he fails?
Yeah, and do you think, Nana, is it going to be the issues like immigration that obviously fared well on the campaign trail? Or is it going to be this personal revenge mission? Which do you think is front of his mind?
I mean, I think when you think about Trump, and if you look at the past few weeks as we're seeing the administration come together as any sort of prologue or prediction for next year, which again, I would caution about making. I think tentative is the word of the day here for when we're thinking about predictions. I think the only prediction I am confident in making is that it will be probably chaotic. And I even said probably, but I think I could lean into the chaos, and that probably will happen. I do think that we've seen, for example, already President-elect Trump suing members of the media. And that is something that he talked about in terms of the campaign trail. That's something that I think a lot of people in Washington are watching. But if you also look at, for example, DOJ, the Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk effort to modernize the federal government, that's happened out of the gate very quickly. They've been in Washington talking to different people. So you're starting to see all of these things take shape.
Yeah, let's talk about the media thing, because that's really interesting. This ABC News settlement, the defamation suit for $15 million. He's now going after the Des Moines Register for a pre-election poll that was essentially unfavorable to him. I mean, he's not president yet, and he's really going after this, Jen. Should we be worried about this?
This has been a hallmark of the campaign. So as someone who would go to these rallies, I would sometimes be in the press area taking pictures with the rest of the media. There was a moment in every rally where he would turn the entire crowd, point them at us, and they would boo at us. And it was very intimidating. I think this idea of intimidating the media is something his supporters love, he loves doing, and doing that through the courts is one of his favorite things to do. I am surprised that ABC gave in. I think they probably could have won that lawsuit.
Well, it's clearly emboldened him, right? I know.
Right. And I think that's an important question that you're raising. Is there a legal basis for this? Can they actually win? In the case of the Des Moines Register suit, it's based on a state law about deceptive advertising. So when you talk to legal experts, they do question whether there is a legal path for victory here. But the ABC settlement, I think, certainly has given a lot of media experts are saying this is perhaps creating pause for other news organizations, thinking they settled this instead of going through this. This sets a dangerous precedent for other news organizations.
And we've had so much that's happened this year. We've done a review of it, and it was a big reminder for me, all these things that have happened, that because we move so fast, don't we? We chew through the news cycle, we meme stuff, and then we move on. What has stood out for you both as something that we will still be talking about in years to come, something that will endure beyond the fact that Trump won?
I think one of the things that this Trump win telegraphs that is absolutely going to endure is that there's a lot of Americans who think the government almost doesn't matter. Let's shut it all down. And we see this in Trump's cabinet picks. They're nihilistic. They're anti-institutional in a way that we didn't see in the first administration. If he's even a quarter successful with the things he promised, the entire nation is going to see what it means like to have the government not function in the way that it did before. and then come to an understanding of either that's what we wanted or, oh, we didn't really understand how important these institutions were.
And when we think about institutions and governments, why they matter, I think we're looking at the global implications of what will happen with U.S. leadership, not just when it comes to foreign policy, but also when we're thinking about climate change. For me, the story that I think people may have forgotten is that this will go down as the hottest year on record, a year in the calendar year in which we breached the Paris Agreement threshold of 1.5. And we do not see that trend changing unless governments, companies, people take action. When we're talking about climate change, when we're talking about global warming, so much of this does have to happen at the government level because countries have to agree. And when that's a very big question as to what the U.S.'s role is going to be in that next year.
Okay. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank
Really
you.
interesting perspective. So that's all we have time for today and for 2024. Thanks for watching, and do join us again in January, inauguration time, of course. We'll see you then.